You think love grows on trees? Without gifts, without flowers, there is no love. Her voice cut through the still air of our bedroom, like glass shattering on tile. Madison stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed, eyes burning. I was still in my work shirt, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, trying to make sense of how we'd gone from a quiet evening to this explosion. I show you love every day, I said, forcing my voice to stay level. I fix your car, I make you breakfast on Sundays. Those are chores, Luke. That's not romance. You never surprise me with anything. No flowers, no jewelry, not even a box of chocolates unless I beg for it. She was pacing now, the click of her heels like a metronome for my pulse. Do you honestly think a marriage survives on roses and gold chains? I asked, leaning forward on the edge of the bed. I think a marriage survives on feeling wanted, she shot back. And right now, I feel like your roommate who does the laundry. That stung. I rubbed my forehead. You're telling me that if I don't start bringing you things, expensive things, what? You'll stop loving me? Her jaw tightened. I'm telling you that love without attention, without proof, dies. And right now, ours is on life support. The room felt smaller. My chest felt heavier. This wasn't the first time she'd hinted at this, but tonight, there was no hint, just a line drawn in the sand. Madison, I'm here. I come home every night. I'm not out with buddies or staying late for drinks. I'm working for us. Isn't that proof enough? She shook her head slowly. No, that's just existing. I want to feel special. I want to feel like you chose me today, not just 3 years ago. We went back and forth for another 10 minutes, her words sharp, mine stubborn. No one conceded. No one softened. When she finally left the room, her perfume lingered in the air like an accusation. I sat there, staring at the closed door, thinking about how far we'd drifted. My life, until recently, had been a steady pattern. Early mornings, black coffee, 40 minutes in traffic to my job at the insurance office. I was good at what I did, maybe too good, because I was always the one they called when a case needed urgent attention. Evenings were simple, dinner at home, a walk around the neighborhood, sometimes a late movie on the couch. I thought we were solid. Ordinary, maybe, but safe. Tonight, I realized safe wasn't enough for her, and that scared me more than I wanted to admit. The smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen before I even opened my eyes. Madison was already up, moving around in that purposeful way she had when she was determined to start the day right. I pulled on a t-shirt and padded down the hall. She was at the stove, her silk robe cinched tight, hair pulled into a neat bun. The clink of a spatula against the pan was the only sound in the room. Morning, I said, keeping my voice light. Morning, she replied without turning. Her tone was cool, but not icy. We sat at opposite ends of the table, the sunlight spilling through the blinds and striping the wood between us. She slid a plate toward me. Eggs, toast, the kind of breakfast she used to make more often. I sipped my coffee, watching steam curl from the mug. About last night, I began. Her fork paused midair. You were right, I said, forcing the words out smooth, like they didn't cost me anything. I've been inattentive. I should have been showing you more. Flowers, little surprises. I'll do better. For the first time in weeks, her expression softened. Really, really, I managed to smile. I'll start making time for it. You'll see. She leaned back in her chair, that faint, pleased smile crossing her lips, the one she wore when she'd won an argument. I just want to feel appreciated, Luke. It's not about the money, it's about the gesture. Of course. I nodded, pretending I hadn't heard the contradiction in her words. We moved on to other topics, her coworker's promotion, the neighbor's new fence, but I barely registered any of it. My mind was elsewhere, already running the math. Flowers once a week, maybe a nice dinner twice a month, small gifts here and there. It wouldn't bankrupt us, but it meant I'd have to stay later at the office to cover the extra expenses. She seemed content as she cleared the table, humming softly. I stayed seated, swirling the coffee in my cup, feeling that low thrum of unease in my chest. This wasn't about flowers. It wasn't about jewelry. It was about a box I had to keep checking so she'd feel secure. And the thing about boxes? The more you check them, the more they feel like a chore. Still, I told myself it was worth it. If this was what kept the peace, if this was what kept her smiling at me instead of looking at me like a stranger, then I'd play along. As she rinsed the dishes, she glanced over her shoulder. You're quiet. Just thinking about work? I lied. She turned back to the sink, satisfied with the answer. I drained my coffee, slid the chair back, and grabbed my keys. In the driveway, the morning air was sharp and cool. I took a breath, letting it sting a little. If this was the game, I'd play it. But deep down, I already knew. This wasn't romance we were building. It was a performance, and I wasn't sure how long I could keep it up. The first week, it felt almost novel. On Monday, I stopped at a florist 2 blocks from the office, choosing a bouquet of soft pink roses. Madison opened the door before I even reached for the knob, her eyes lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in months. She kissed my cheek, took the flowers, and disappeared into the kitchen to find a vase. On Wednesday, I ducked into a small gift shop and found a silver charm bracelet. Nothing extravagant, but shiny enough to catch her attention. She met me at the door again, beaming, looping her arms around my neck as if the bracelet itself had hugged her. And so it went. Some nights it was chocolates, other nights a candle or a scarf she'd once admired in a storefront. Each time, her reaction was warm, immediate, and unguarded. For a while, I told myself this was working. But the longer it went on, the more it felt like a second job. I'd leave the office later and later, telling myself the overtime would cover the cost of all these little gestures. My desk began to drown in case files. Dinner at home grew colder, literally, as I arrived just in time to reheat my plate while she told me about her day between bites of dessert. She didn't seem to notice, or maybe she just didn't mind. As long as I showed up with something in hand, the rest didn't seem to matter. One Friday, I walked in with a potted orchid balanced carefully in my arms. She actually squealed, and threw herself against me in the entryway. But as she arranged it by the window, chattering about how it would brighten the room, I realized she hadn't once asked how my day had been. The truth was, most days had been long, exhausting, the kind where the office lights felt like they were boring into my skull, and the only relief was shutting my car door and sitting in the silence before heading home. Still, I kept it up. The smile she gave me each evening when I held out another offering. It was addictive in its own way. But the quiet after she set the gift down, the way she drifted back to her phone or her TV show without another glance in my direction, that silence was starting to feel heavier than the brief joy could lift. One night, as I locked the front door behind me, I caught our reflection in the hallway mirror. Me, holding a small box. Her, already unwrapping it before I'd even taken off my coat. It hit me then, we weren't a couple sharing moments. We were an exchange, my time and money for her brief approval. And deep down, I couldn't shake the thought that this trade was costing me more than either of us realized. The office was quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioning and the occasional groan of the old elevator down the hall. My desk lamp cast a small pool of light over the paperwork I'd been buried in for hours. Another case had landed on my desk at 4:45 p.m. Urgent stamped across the file and read. I was halfway through a report when my phone buzzed. Madison's name lit up the screen. "Hey," I answered, leaning back in my chair. There was no greeting, just her voice, soft, shaky. "Where are you?" I glanced at my watch. "Nearly 9. At work. I told you this morning I might be late." "I know," she said, but there was a catch in her breath. It's late. And you've been staying late a lot lately." The words were careful, but I could hear the edge beneath them. "I'm trying to wrap up this file. And I need to tell you," I hesitated, because I knew how it would sound. "I've got to leave for a business trip tonight. Something came up in Boston. I'll be back in a few days." There was a pause. Then, quietly, "Oh, I'll call you when I land," I offered. But instead of her usual, "Okay, be safe," I heard a muffled sound, like she'd covered the phone to hide it. When she came back on, her voice was trembling. "Luke, I don't like this. I don't like you being gone so much." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "Madison, this is work. The same work that pays for those flowers and little surprises you love. I'm doing this for us." She didn't answer right away. When she did, it was barely above a whisper. "It doesn't feel like us anymore." That hit me harder than I expected. For a moment, I just stared at the papers in front of me, the words blurring together. "I'm not saying I don't appreciate what you do," she went on. "But sometimes it feels like you're not really here, even when you're home." I closed my eyes. "We'll talk when I get back, okay? Don't wait up tonight." There was another pause. Then the quiet sound of her crying, small, uneven sobs that she tried to swallow. "Okay," she said finally. When the line went dead, I sat there in the dim office, the weight of the phone heavy in my hand. I thought about the dozens of little bags and boxes I'd carried through our front door these past weeks, the way her eyes had lit up each time. I thought about how, even then, we'd spent less and less time actually talking. Maybe she'd been right last night in the kitchen, about me not being there, not really. Or maybe the truth was worse, that I'd been there all along, and we'd both still felt alone. The flight back was short, but it felt longer than it should have. I'd barely slept in Boston, my mind split between meetings and the memory of her voice breaking over the phone. On the way home from the airport, I stopped at the same little florist where I'd bought the first bouquet weeks ago. The roses this time were deep red, almost the shade of dried wine. I thought maybe the gesture would smooth over whatever raw edge had crept into our last conversation. When I walked through the front door, the house smelled faintly of cinnamon. Madison appeared from the living room, her hair loose around her shoulders, wearing one of those soft sweaters I'd always liked. "Hi," I said, holding out the bouquet. She smiled, but it was different. The corners of her mouth lifted, but the warmth in her eyes was muted, as if she were trying to convince herself to feel it. She took the flowers, brushed her cheek against mine in a polite kiss, and carried them to the kitchen without another word. I set my bag by the stairs and followed her. "Long couple of days," I said, leaning against the counter. She was already snipping the stems. I can imagine. The silence that settled between us wasn't angry, just thin, fragile. Later, in the living room, we sat side by side on the couch, the television casting soft light across the walls. She shifted closer, resting her head against my shoulder. Her hand found my knee, then moved higher, a familiar touch I hadn't felt in weeks. I hesitated, then gently caught her wrist. "I'm wiped out, Mads. Can we not tonight?" She froze for a moment, then drew her hand back, tucking it into her lap. "Sure," she said softly, eyes still on the TV. I could feel the air changing, turning heavier. "It's not that I don't want to," I offered. "I'm just exhausted. You know how much this trip took out of me." She nodded without looking at me. "I know. You're doing it all for me, right?" There was no bite in her tone, but the words still landed like a question I wasn't sure I wanted to answer. "Yes," I said finally. "Everything I'm doing, working late, traveling, it's for us. For you." She gave me a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Then I guess I should be grateful." We sat there in the flicker of the television, our bodies close but our minds miles apart. The flowers were in a vase on the coffee table, their petals catching the light. Pretty, fragile things, just like whatever we were trying to hold on to. And for the first time, I wondered if the gifts had been building us up, or quietly replacing something we'd already lost. Another long day at the office. Another night when the glow of my computer screen was the only thing keeping me company. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the streetlights were already on, casting that pale, wintry light across the lawn. Inside, the TV was on but muted, the flickering images playing over the walls like restless shadows. Madison was curled up on the couch, her knees drawn to her chest, a throw blanket tangled around her legs. When she looked up, her eyes were swollen, her mascara smudged in faint streaks down her cheeks. I set my briefcase down slowly. "What's wrong?" She shook her head, wiping at her face with the back of her hand. "Nothing. I'm fine." "Madison." My voice was quiet but firm. Her lip trembled, and then, without another word, she got up and crossed the room in 2 quick steps. She pressed herself into me, arms wound tight around my middle. I could feel the small tremors in her shoulders. "I get it now," she whispered against my chest. I was wrong. I held her, waiting, letting her find the words. "All those flowers, the gifts, they made me smile for a minute. But it's not the same. It's not what I thought I wanted." She drew back just enough to look up at me. "I thought if you showed me more, I'd feel closer to you. But I don't. I just feel like you're somewhere else, even when you're standing right here." The admission sat between us like a fragile object. I didn't rush to fill the silence. Her fingers twisted into the fabric of my shirt. "I told myself it was your fault before, that you weren't romantic enough. But it's me too. I stopped noticing the things you already did. I stopped appreciating you." I searched her face for signs of deflection, for the performance I'd grown used to, but there was none. Just rawness. Regret. "It's not just you," I said finally. "I thought if I gave you what you asked for, it would fix things." But I wasn't giving you me. Not the real me. Just substitutes. She nodded, a tear slipping free. We used to talk for hours about nothing. We used to laugh so much. Now it's just transactions. I let out a slow breath. Maybe we both forgot that the real proof of love isn't something you can buy. Her eyes glistened as she whispered, I miss us, Luke. For a moment, neither of us moved. The muted television threw a soft light across her face, and I thought about the nights we'd sat in this exact spot, leaning into each other, content without needing anything else. I miss us too, I said. She rested her forehead against mine. No more keeping score. No more you didn't do this, or I need that. Just try again. Try again, I repeated, letting the words settle in my chest. We stayed there, arms around each other, the room silent except for the faint hum of the TV. There were no flowers between us, no shiny box to open. Just her heartbeat under my palm and mine under hers, steady, human, real. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like we weren't performing anymore. We were simply here, together. That night, the bedroom felt different. Not in the way a fresh coat of paint changes a room, but in the way air feels after a storm. Cleaner, quieter, as if something heavy had finally moved on. We both changed into pajamas without the usual space between us. When I slid under the covers, Madison followed, curling onto her side to face me. For a moment, we just lay there, listening to the faint tick of the clock on the dresser. I don't want to lose what we have, she said softly, her voice carrying that vulnerable edge I'd only heard a handful of times in our marriage. You won't, I replied. But we can't keep going the way we were. We both know that. She nodded, pulling the blanket higher over her shoulder. I think I got caught up in the idea that love had to be visible, that if I couldn't point to it, like a bouquet on the table or a gift bag by the door, it meant it wasn't there. I let the thought breathe for a moment before answering, and I thought I could buy my way out of the distance, that if I just kept giving, we'd avoid the hard parts. Turns out the hard parts were the only way back. Her hand found mine under the blanket. When did we stop just showing up for each other? I don't know, I admitted. Maybe when life got busier. Maybe when we started assuming the other person already knew how we felt. She smiled faintly. Let's stop assuming. We talked for hours. About little things. How much we missed our weekend walks. How we'd fallen into a habit of half listening while scrolling our phones. About bigger things. Her feeling unseen. My feeling unappreciated. Both of us quietly resenting the other for not reading minds. There were moments we laughed, remembering the ridiculous first date where I spilled coffee on her shoes. Moments we went quiet, sitting with the truth that we'd both played a part in building the wall between us. I'll never measure your love by gifts again, she said finally, her thumb tracing lazy circles on the back of my hand. Not because I don't like them, but because I know now they're not the proof I thought they were. And I'll bring back the small things, I told her. Not the ones that cost money. The ones that cost time. Breakfast in bed. Notes in your lunch bag. Those moments where it's just us, without anything shiny between. Her eyes softened. That's all I really wanted. Somewhere between one conversation and the next, we drifted closer until her head rested against my chest. The clock on the dresser marked each second, but the night didn't feel like it was slipping away. It felt like it was giving something back. When her breathing evened out, I stayed awake a little longer, my hand resting over hers. We hadn't fixed everything in a single night. But the air was clear, the storm was gone, and for the first time in months, I believed we could make it through. Because tonight, there were no gifts in the room. Just two people, wide awake to what they almost lost, and willing, finally, to hold on with both hands.